When Donald Trump got the letter, he almost didn't read it. It came tucked inside a thick envelope of event invites and veteran outreach requests delivered to Mar-a-Lago every week. Most got passed to staff, but this one stood out. The handwriting on the front was shaky but bold, a blue ink scrawl on yellowed paper. He opened it during a quiet morning while sipping coffee and staring out over the golf course. It was from a man named Raymond Doyle, age 87, a Marine who served in Korea and Vietnam. The letter wasn't asking for money, or a photo, or a campaign stop. It was a simple request from a dying man who wanted to have a final barbecue with his family and friends before he passed, and to shake the hand of the man he believed saved the country. Raymond didn't know if the letter would even reach Trump, but he wrote it anyway, just in case. Trump read it twice, then again. The words were simple, grateful, honest. "I've got maybe a few weeks left, sir. Hospice says it'll be fast. My granddaughter says I should go out with a smile. So I'm having one last barbecue, just hot dogs and some music. My backyard's not much, but if you happen to be anywhere near Macon County, Georgia, well, it would mean a lot if you dropped by, even just for a handshake." Trump didn't tell anyone about it at first. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and slipped it into his inside jacket pocket. That evening, while aides talked campaign strategy and rallies, he stared at the sunset from his porch and thought about the letter, about men like Raymond, men who had fought and bled while politicians made speeches and signed papers in comfort. Trump didn't know why this letter hit him different. Maybe it was the handwriting, maybe the honesty. Maybe he was just tired of doing everything through cameras and handlers. That night, he made a call. Just one. Not to staff. Not to press. Just one private investigator he trusted. "Find out if he's real," Trump said, "and if it's true." 2 days later, he got a reply. Raymond Doyle was real. He had 2 Purple Hearts, 3 grown sons, 1 daughter who had passed away, and a teenage granddaughter named Emily, who had taken time off college to care for him. The cancer had started in the bones. It had moved fast. The doctors gave him less than a month. The barbecue was planned for the following Sunday. Trump cleared his schedule quietly. No press, no advisors, no entourage, just him and 1 driver in a rented black SUV. He wore jeans and a baseball cap and carried a cooler with steaks he'd picked out himself. No one recognized him when he pulled up to the modest house on the edge of the woods. There were folding chairs, a rusty smoker, country music playing on a small Bluetooth speaker. Kids ran barefoot through the yard. Flags hung from the back porch. Raymond sat in a wheelchair under the shade of a large oak tree, a thick wool blanket covering his legs. His breathing was slow, but his eyes were sharp. Trump walked up the gravel path. A few people turned. 1 man dropped his beer. Raymond's granddaughter Emily stepped forward, confused, then stunned. "Is this real?" she whispered. "It's real," Trump said. "I'm here for Raymond." The backyard went silent. Then someone said, "He really came." Trump walked straight to the old Marine. "Raymond Doyle?" he asked. Raymond nodded. His lip trembled. "I never thought—" Trump bent down and shook his hand firmly. "You fought for this country. The least I can do is share a hot dog with you." Raymond laughed. It turned into a cough. Trump stayed with him for nearly 2 hours. They didn't talk politics. They talked about Korea, about the men who never came home, about fishing, about love. Trump helped Raymond's granddaughter carry out the potato salad. He grilled steaks side by side with Raymond's oldest son. He posed for a single photo, just one, at the family's request, but told them not to post it. "Let's keep this between us," he said. "This is your moment, not mine." Before leaving, Trump leaned close to Raymond and whispered something in his ear that made the old Marine tear up. No one knows what he said. Trump got back in the SUV, nodded to the driver, and they were gone before sunset. No one from the press ever reported it. No tweets, no campaign mention. Just one quiet visit that lived on in the Doyle family for generations. Weeks later, when Raymond passed peacefully in his sleep, Emily wrote a follow-up letter. She didn't send it to Trump. She just kept it in a scrapbook next to the photo. In it, she wrote, "You gave my grandfather the best day of his life. You showed us that kindness doesn't always come with cameras. Thank you for seeing him, for sitting with him, for making him feel like he still mattered." At the funeral, they played "God Bless America" as they lowered the flag-draped casket, and on a small table beside the guest book was the folded letter Trump had first received. No fanfare, just quiet proof that sometimes the biggest moments happen in the smallest places. 3 weeks after Raymond Doyle's funeral, a cardboard box arrived at the Mar-a-Lago front gate with no return address. Inside it was a wooden frame, handmade, carved with the words "Semper Fi" along the bottom edge. Inside the frame was a photo of Trump and Raymond sitting together under the oak tree, smiling. Tucked behind the photo was a folded American flag and a short handwritten note. He said it was the best day of his life. He wanted you to have this. Thank you for honoring a Marine. Trump stood in silence for several minutes, holding the frame, then placed it gently on the mantel in his private study, where only a few ever saw it. He didn't say a word about it in interviews or speeches, but something in him shifted that day. Down in Macon County, life moved on. Emily returned to school. The Doyle family tried to find a new normal without their patriarch, but stories about that afternoon began to quietly circulate. A neighbor who saw a black SUV. A child who said, "That man looked like Trump." A cousin who remembered him flipping burgers. Most people thought it was a mix-up or rumor. The Doyle family didn't confirm anything. "It was Grandpa's day," Emily would say. "He wanted it to stay ours." But fate has a way of revealing what's hidden. About a month later, Emily received a call from the university's financial aid office. She assumed it was about her overdue tuition, but the woman on the line sounded cheerful. "Emily Doyle? We've just received a full scholarship package in your name. All fees cleared, housing covered, books included." Emily blinked. "That can't be right. I didn't apply for anything." The woman smiled through the phone. "It came through an anonymous donor. Said it was to honor a Marine." That same week, Raymond's youngest son, who had struggled to keep his small mechanic shop afloat, was informed his loan had been paid off. Not refinanced, paid, in full. A local legal team showed up offering free assistance to help him expand. "Someone with influence asked us to look into your case," they said. "Said your father served his country well." Word began to spread. Quiet things, subtle things. A church in the neighborhood suddenly had a new roof. A broken-down veterans' van was replaced overnight. At first, people thought it was a government program. Maybe a lucky coincidence. But it wasn't. It was Donald Trump, quietly, personally. No headlines. No press releases. He had taken the list of names from Raymond's barbecue, the people who came, who mattered to that Marine, and told his private team, "Do what you can. No names, no credit, just help them live better." Back in Florida, Trump sat with a yellow legal pad, making notes, scribbling down ideas for a foundation he wanted to build. Not political, not flashy, just something real, something that reached people like Raymond. "We're going to call it the Quiet Honor Project," he told his aide one evening. "It'll never be public, but every dollar goes to families like his." The aide asked, "Should we announce it at the next rally?" Trump shook his head. Some things aren't for crowds. Some things are just right." Meanwhile, Emily kept the barbecue photo hidden from her friends. Not because she was ashamed, but because it felt sacred. Something beyond politics. When the rumor finally reached her campus, classmates asked, "Was that really him?" She'd smile and say, "That was my grandfather's guest." And that was enough. Late one night, she wrote a journal entry. "I used to think leaders had to be loud to be strong. But that day, under the oak tree, I saw something different. I saw a man who listened, who didn't come with speeches or cameras, just presence, just respect. Maybe that's the kind of strength we need more of." In the months that followed, more anonymous donations flowed across Macon County. A local youth center reopened. A single mother found her hospital bill erased. The Doyle family never confirmed the source, but they knew. They all knew. Trump never returned. But his presence stayed. In the quiet moments, in the changed lives, in the small acts that rippled outward. And in a small box in Emily's closet, next to her grandfather's dog tags and medals, was the cooler lid he'd used that day to rest his glass of lemonade. She'd written one word on it in permanent marker: gratitude. 6 months later, on a brisk fall morning, Emily Doyle walked across the lawn of the university with her backpack slung over one shoulder and a coffee in hand. Life had picked up again. Midterms were coming. Her friends talked about internships and travel plans. But Emily's mind was still on home, on her grandfather, on that single afternoon that changed everything. She hadn't told many people the full story, not even her closest roommate. It felt like a secret treasure, one she didn't want to cheapen with gossip. That afternoon had shown her something she never learned in books: that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it just shows up quietly and leaves a blessing behind. Back in Florida, Trump was seated at a desk in a private office in Mar-a-Lago. The old framed photo of Raymond Doyle still sat to his right. He glanced at it every morning before starting his day. On this particular morning, he flipped through a folder marked Veteran Outreach. Most of the documents inside were staff reports and proposals, but at the bottom was a letter. This one printed neatly on white paper. It was from a woman named Linda Parker, head nurse at a rural VA hospice in Arkansas. She wrote about a man named Sergeant Earl Whitman, another veteran who had served alongside Raymond in Korea. Earl had heard about the mystery visitor at Raymond's last barbecue. He didn't believe it at first, but then he saw the photo. He said he recognized the handshake, Linda wrote. Said only one man in politics ever shook his hand like that. Firm eye contact. No rush. He said, if you were the man who came to Raymond's barbecue, he'd just like to say thank you before he goes. He's got a few days left. No pressure. He understands. But he asked me to send this letter, just in case. Trump stared at the letter. No cameras, no press. Just another quiet door opened. He folded the paper, set it aside, and picked up his phone. "Get the jet ready," he said. "Just a short trip. No announcements." The team knew not to ask questions anymore. When Trump traveled like this, it wasn't for politics. It was for something else. Something real. By nightfall, the jet touched down in a small regional airport. From there, a black sedan drove the final stretch through winding country roads until it reached the VA hospice facility, nestled between pine trees and old farmland. Trump walked in wearing a navy coat and ball cap. The receptionist blinked in disbelief. "Is that really?" He held up a finger gently. "Just visiting a friend." Earl Whitman was resting in a room lit by soft lamps, oxygen tubes in his nose, faded war photos on the wall. Trump stepped in quietly. Earl opened his eyes slowly and smiled. "You really came," he whispered. "You're real." Trump pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed. "Raymond told me about you," he said. "Said you were the best shot in the unit." Earl chuckled, weak but proud. He wasn't wrong. For over an hour they talked. Not about the war, about fishing in the Ozarks, about a girl Earl once proposed to under the stars, about the simple things. As night fell, Trump reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of Raymond's original letter. "He kept this close," Trump said. "I thought you might want to see it." Earl's hand trembled as he touched the page. "Thank you for giving him that day. He never stopped talking about it." Trump nodded. "He gave me more than I gave him." Before leaving, Trump stood and placed a hand on Earl's shoulder. "You're not forgotten," he said. "Not on my watch." Earl smiled. "Tell Emily she made him proud. And tell her to keep the faith." Trump promised he would. Then he walked out, just like he came. Quiet, unannounced, unforgettable. That visit never made the news, but the hospice staff still talked about it months later. About how a man they'd only seen on TV came and sat like a son beside one of theirs. No fanfare, no speeches, just presence. Back home, Emily received a handwritten letter days later. No signature, just a note. "I met Sergeant Whitman. He told me to tell you something important. You made your grandfather proud. Keep the faith. A friend." She kept that letter in the same box as the cooler lid. Every so often, when life felt too noisy, too fast, too uncertain, she would open it and read the words again. And she would remember the man who came to a backyard barbecue not for politics, but for love, for duty, for one final salute to a generation that built the country. The first real winter after Raymond Doyle's passing settled heavy on Macon County. The trees stood bare. The sky turned gray. And for the first time in a long time, the Doyle house felt quiet. Too quiet. Emily came home for Christmas break, and though the stockings were hung and the lights were up, something in the air had changed. Her grandfather's laugh, once the loudest thing in the house, was missing. She stepped into the backyard on Christmas Eve, stood under the same oak tree where the barbecue had taken place, and just stared at the empty lawn. No flags, no folding chairs, just memories. She didn't cry. She just breathed it in and whispered, "Thank you." Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Just 6 words. "You still make him proud. Merry Christmas." There was no name, no photo, but she knew who it was from. 2 states away, Trump sat by a fireplace at Mar-a-Lago. The frame with Raymond's photo still rested above the mantel. But now beside it was another one, Earl Whitman, grinning in a hospital bed, wearing a Marine Corps cap, holding Trump's hand. The staff never asked where the photos came from. They simply dusted around them. One of the butlers noticed Trump had been quieter that week. Less television, more handwritten notes. He was drafting something new, a list of names, not donors, not politicians, just Americans he'd met over the years who reminded him of what the country used to feel like, what it still could be. At the top of the list were 2 names, Raymond Doyle and Earl Whitman. By January, the Quiet Honor Project had already helped over 24 families. every single one connected to a veteran or public servant. Hospital bills paid, legal battles ended, homes restored. But none of them knew where the help came from. They only knew it came after funerals, after folded flags, after moments of unbearable silence. In mid-February, a young widow in Ohio opened her mailbox to find a letter from a foundation she'd never heard of. Inside was a check for $23,000 and a simple note. For the one who served and the family who sacrificed. That was all. No names, no spotlight, just help. Emily, now back at school, started volunteering at a nearby nursing home. She didn't tell anyone why, she just felt drawn to it. There, she met a retired Air Force cook named Marty, who reminded her of her grandfather. He told stories that made her laugh and cry in the same breath. One day, as they played cards in the rec room, he leaned forward and said, "Did I ever tell you about the time Trump came to my VA hospital just to see one man?" Emily froze. "No," she said softly. "Tell me." Marty grinned. He came without warning. No cameras, no press. Just walked in and sat by the guy's bed for 2 hours. I'll never forget it. That man died the next morning. But he died at peace, knowing someone still remembered him. Emily nodded. Her throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. "I believe that." That night, she called her dad. "Do you think Grandpa knew it would grow like this?" she asked. Her father paused. "I think he hoped it might. But I don't think he ever expected it. He just believed in one man enough to write a letter. And that letter lit a fire." In Washington, rumors started to swirl. Political analysts couldn't understand the sudden spike in Trump's approval among veterans. They looked for ads, TV interviews, policy announcements, but there were none. What they didn't know was that kindness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up with a cooler of steaks and a ball cap and makes a man feel seen one last time. In a quiet moment before bed, Trump opened a drawer in his nightstand. Inside were just two things: Raymond's original letter and a small silver dog tag engraved with the words, "Not forgotten." He held them both in his hand, closed his eyes, and whispered, "You didn't just serve your country. You reminded me why I serve too." Spring came early to Georgia that year. The grass turned green faster than usual, and wildflowers began blooming along the edges of the Doyle property before Easter. Emily was home again, this time not for a holiday or a break, but to help her grandmother prepare to sell the house. It wasn't an easy decision, but too many memories lived in the walls, too many quiet echoes of Raymond's laugh, too many nights where his old chair sat empty. Emily walked from room to room, gathering old books and war medals, folding blankets that still smelled like cigar smoke and cedar wood. In the attic, she found a dusty crate marked marine stuff. Inside were yellowed photos, old letters, a rusted compass, and a small pocket Bible with her grandfather's name scribbled inside. On the last page, there was a torn scrap of paper. It read, "If Trump ever really shows up, tell him thank you. Tell him I meant every word." Emily folded the note and slipped it into her back pocket. That night, she sat out under the oak tree with her laptop, writing a short blog post about the barbecue. She didn't use names, didn't say who visited, just wrote about the power of presence, about how sometimes people show up when it matters most, and that one act of kindness can ripple through generations. She clicked publish and closed the lid. The next morning, the blog had over 30,000 views. By noon, it was over 100,000. She didn't know how it spread, but somehow it reached veterans groups, family circles, and quiet communities across the country. Meanwhile, in Palm Beach, Trump was reviewing documents in his office when an aide knocked gently. "Sir," he said, holding up a tablet, "you might want to see this." He handed over the screen. On it was Emily's blog. No flashy headlines, no viral gimmicks, just a quiet story about dignity. Trump read every word, then read it again. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, and whispered, "She gets it." That week, without telling anyone, he arranged for the Doyle house to be bought anonymously, above market price, so it could be turned into a local veterans center, a place where soldiers could gather, share stories, get help, and find peace. The sign out front would read, "The Doyle House, in honor of Raymond, a quiet warrior." A local nonprofit was funded under the same name. Emily found out weeks later when a lawyer showed up at their door with a deed and a letter. She opened the envelope. It read, "Some places deserve to live on. Some names should never fade. Thank you for sharing him with the world. D.T." The grand opening was small, just family and friends, a few Marines, a chaplain, and a surprise gift on the wall. The photo of Raymond and Trump at the barbecue, newly framed with the inscription, "He showed up." People asked who funded it all. Emily only smiled. "A friend of my grandfather's," she said. In the months that followed, the Doyle House hosted support meetings, job training programs, and grief counseling for military families. Word spread, slowly, steadily. Veterans from 3 counties began attending weekly barbecues in the backyard. They sat under the oak tree and shared memories. Some brought guitars, some brought tears, all brought stories. And every story added another layer of life to the place that had once just been a quiet Southern home. And somewhere in the middle of it all, on a warm Sunday afternoon, a young boy asked Emily, "Is it true Donald Trump came here once?" She looked at the boy, then at the spot under the tree, and said, "He didn't just come. He stayed. In every way that matters." News of the Doyle house reached further than anyone expected. A conservative podcast picked up the blog post and read it aloud during an episode. Then a retired general shared it in a veterans newsletter. Soon after, families from across the country began writing in, asking how they could start their own version of a quiet honor center. Emily found herself answering emails from wives of deployed soldiers, daughters of veterans lost to suicide, even young Marines who just wanted a place to belong. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a celebrity. She was just a granddaughter with a story. But that was enough, because the story was real. And it reminded people of something they'd almost forgotten, what it feels like to be seen. Back in Florida, Trump watched the ripple unfold. His advisors urged him to mention it in a speech. "It would play well in the Midwest," one said. "You've got a chance to win back some suburban families," another offered. But Trump shook his head. "It's not for winning votes," he said. "It's for doing what's right." Instead, he picked up the phone and called a man named Colby, a disabled vet in Kentucky, who had written a long letter after reading Emily's story. Colby's message was raw, honest. "I was ready to give up. Thought nobody cared. Then I saw your name hidden between the lines. I don't know why, but it gave me a reason to hang on." Trump called him personally. No staff, no script, just a quiet voice saying, "I got your letter, and I care." Colby wept. And somewhere in the hills of Kentucky, a man who had nearly ended his life the week before found strength again. Emily flew to Washington that summer, invited by a small nonprofit to speak at a private dinner for veterans advocates. She wore a simple black dress and clutched the dog tags she'd kept since her grandfather's passing. When she took the stage, the room quieted. No one knew what to expect. She wasn't famous. She wasn't polished. But as she told the story of a letter, a handshake, and a backyard barbecue, more than one war-hardened soldier wiped away tears. And when she finished, the room stood. Not out of politics. Out of respect. That night, back at her hotel, she found an envelope slipped under her door. No name. Just a note card. On it was written, "The world needs more quiet heroes. You became one the day you wrote him that thank you." She didn't need a signature to know who it was from. She pressed the card to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks later, the Quiet Honor Project quietly expanded. New centers were funded in Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Pennsylvania. None bore Trump's name. None had his face on them. But his fingerprints were everywhere. A former soldier in Oklahoma got his first job in years because of it. A widow in Pennsylvania received legal help she never thought she could afford. In Tennessee, a veteran's child received a scholarship that kept him from dropping out of college. Each act anonymous, each one rooted in the same message: you are not forgotten. And though the world moved on with headlines and politics and noise, in pockets of America, something softer was growing. Something lasting. Underneath the oak tree in Georgia, where the first handshake had been made, a small plaque had been placed by the Doyle family. It read, "This is where kindness showed up." Trump never visited the site again. He said what needed to be said. He did what needed to be done. But sometimes, when things got too loud or too fake or too political, he would walk into his private study, sit down in front of that photo, and remember the way Raymond Doyle's hand had felt. Strong, grateful, American. That fall, a small documentary crew doing a piece on forgotten veterans came through Macon County. They weren't with a major network, just two young filmmakers trying to tell real stories. They'd heard whispers of the Doyle house and the mysterious way it came to be. Emily agreed to speak with them cautiously, making sure they understood one rule: no politics, no spin. Just truth. They recorded her under the oak tree. She told the story slowly, without drama, without flair. Just facts. A letter, a barbecue, a visitor. She never used Trump's name, just called him a friend of my grandfather's. But as the interview aired on a small streaming channel, people knew. They just knew. Viewers across the country began leaving comments. "My dad would have loved this. I wish someone had done that for my brother. This restored my faith in everything." But one comment stood out. It simply said, "He's still fighting for us. Just in a different way now." The video got shared more than anyone expected. Quietly. Organically. Word of mouth. Not because it was flashy, but because it felt honest. At a rally weeks later, someone from the crowd held up a handmade sign. It read, "Thank you for showing up in Georgia." Trump saw it, said nothing, just nodded once. That was enough. The crowd didn't need the story. They felt it in the way he paused, the way his voice cracked slightly when he spoke about veterans, the way he pointed to the flag and said, "Some gave everything, and we owe them everything." Meanwhile, Emily had started writing letters of her own. Not to leaders, not to newspapers, but to the families of veterans who had passed. She'd send them with a photo of the Doyle house, along with a single line handwritten at the bottom. "Your loved one is remembered here." One by one, letters began arriving in return. Stories, photographs, medals. One woman sent in her father's Bible with a note that read, "This belongs where people still believe in honor." Another family donated their grandfather's war journal, asking that it be displayed somewhere people could read it. Soon, the Doyle house began to feel like more than a center. It became a living archive of courage. In his study, Trump began drafting something he hadn't done in years. A book. But not about politics. About people. About the ones he met when no one was watching. The title was simple: Those Who Remembered. The first chapter began with Raymond Doyle's letter. The original one. The one that started it all. He didn't plan to release it publicly. Not yet. Maybe never. But he wrote it every night by hand. Because some stories deserved ink and silence and reflection. And as winter came again to Georgia, Emily decorated the Doyle house with lights and flags and fresh flowers under the oak tree. On Christmas Eve, a small group of veterans gathered with her outside. They drank cocoa, swapped stories, and sang carols with worn voices and full hearts. No speeches, no reporters, just Americans, remembering each other. A young Marine with a limp and a shaved head approached her quietly. "Are the stories true?" he asked. "About who helped build this?" Emily looked at him, then at the tree, then back at him. "Yes," she said. "And the best part is, he didn't do it to be seen. He did it so others would be." The Marine nodded, then stood in silence, his hand over his heart. And for a long moment, no one spoke. Because they didn't need to. A year had passed since the barbecue, a full circle of seasons, from the smoke of grilled hot dogs to the snow falling lightly on the steps of the Doyle house. Emily stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of chili for the monthly veterans' dinner, when she heard the knock. Not the usual quick tap of volunteers. This one was slow, purposeful. She opened the door and froze. Standing there in a long overcoat, wearing his familiar ball cap pulled low over his eyes, was Donald Trump. No cameras, no aides, just him. "Thought I'd stop by," he said with a small smile. Emily blinked, then stepped aside. "You're always welcome here." He walked in slowly, glancing around at the photos on the wall, the folded flags, the boots on display from men and women who never made it home. "It's grown," he said. She nodded. "Because you planted it?" They didn't say much at first, just walked together through the halls. He paused in front of a black and white photo of Raymond as a young Marine. "He would have liked this," Trump said. Emily looked at the photo too. "He used to say the real war started when they came home." Trump turned to her, his eyes tired but focused. "That's why we build places like this, so they never feel alone again." They sat by the fireplace where a group of vets shared stories. None of them realized who he was. Or maybe they did, and simply chose not to make it a spectacle. One man handed him a cup of coffee. Another passed him a photo of his son lost in Iraq. Trump studied the photo, nodded, and said, "You raised a hero." The man smiled without saying a word. As the evening wound down, Trump stepped outside to the oak tree alone. Emily followed a few paces behind. Snow crunched under their boots. He stood for a long time, staring at the plaque that read, "This is where kindness showed up." He touched the edge of it with gloved fingers. "He was the reason I kept going that year," he said softly. "When things got dark, when the headlines got nasty, I'd think about that letter." Emily's voice caught. "He believed in you before the world did." Trump turned to her. "He reminded me what this whole thing is about. Not the crowds, not the stage, just doing right by the people who gave everything." Before he left, He handed her a folded piece of paper. "Give this to the board when I'm gone. It'll keep the lights on for a few more years." She tucked it in her coat pocket without looking. She already knew. As he walked back to the waiting SUV, she called after him, "Mr. Trump." He turned. "Yes?" She smiled. "He saw you as a soldier, too. Not of war, but of heart." He nodded once, then got in the vehicle and disappeared into the falling snow. Inside the envelope was a personal check, enough to keep the Doyle house open for a decade, and a handwritten note. "Tell the next vet who walks through those doors that he matters. And keep that porch light on. They need to see it shining." Emily framed the letter and placed it just inside the front door, where everyone could read it. She never spoke publicly about the visit. No one posted photos, but everyone who was there knew the truth. And the truth was simple. He came back. Not for recognition, not for votes, but because when you build something with love, you return to it. You protect it. You honor it. And the Doyle house kept growing. One story at a time. One life at a time. One quiet act of American grace after another. 2 years after the barbecue that changed everything, the Doyle house had become more than a building. It had become a movement. There were now 5 houses across the country, each one founded quietly, anonymously, and dedicated to the same mission: to honor the forgotten, the quiet, the ones who gave everything and asked for nothing. Each house carried a plaque that simply read, "Built by Gratitude." No names, no press releases, just reverence. Emily had taken a full-time role overseeing the foundation's work. She traveled state to state, meeting families, helping organize support groups, overseeing renovations, and planting flags in soil that had been stained with both service and silence. At every house, she carried with her 3 things: a folded copy of her grandfather's letter, the thank you note signed DT, and a worn photo of the backyard barbecue. These weren't relics. They were compass points. Proof that one day, one gesture, one handshake could still change the world. At a ribbon cutting in Iowa, a teenage boy approached her. His father had taken his own life the year before, a former Marine with no one to talk to and no place to turn. "My mom said your place gave us a second chance," the boy said. "She said someone powerful saw us, even when we were invisible." Emily knelt down and looked him in the eye. "You were never invisible," she said. "Your father's story mattered. He mattered. And so do you." The boy hugged her tight. And in that hug, she felt the weight of every life touched since the day a letter was mailed with no real expectation of reply. Back in Florida, Trump watched from afar. He didn't attend events. He didn't speak about the project on stage. But he followed every new opening, every letter, every quiet success. The framed photo of Raymond Doyle remained on his mantel, and beside it now were more faces of veterans, children, widows, believers. All of them lit by something rare and strong: hope. At night, he would sit with his notebook, adding names to his list. Not famous names, just Americans. Brave ones, forgotten ones, the real ones. In one corner of the study sat a new map. Push pins marked each Doyle house. A few had small red stars beside them. Those were special. They were the ones built in towns where Trump had once visited quietly. Not as a president, not as a candidate, just as a man who cared. One aide once asked why he didn't talk about it, why he didn't use the story in interviews. Trump looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "Because the moment you shine a spotlight on humility, it disappears." The press never figured it out. They saw headlines rise around Trump's popularity with veterans, but couldn't trace the cause. No rallies, no policy shifts, just a strange, growing loyalty among men and women in uniform. A loyalty born not from spectacle, but from a sense that someone, somewhere, still remembered them when the cameras were gone. On the second anniversary of Raymond Doyle's passing, a candlelight vigil was held under the old oak tree. Hundreds attended. Families, veterans, local officials, and some who drove hundreds of miles just to stand where it all began. Emily read her grandfather's letter aloud. Her voice didn't shake. It rang steady, clear, like a bell on a battlefield. Then she looked out at the crowd and said, "He thought no one would ever read this. But a man did. A man who wasn't supposed to have time. But he made time. And in doing so, he gave us all something more valuable than promises. He gave us presents." The crowd stood in silence. Then, one by one, they lit candles and laid them in a circle beneath the tree. And on a small wooden bench nearby, unnoticed by most, sat a folded ball cap. No name, no note, just left there, like a signature, written in the quiet. The third spring after Raymond Doyle's passing bloomed earlier than expected. Dogwoods blossomed in soft whites and pinks across Macon County, and the breeze carried the smell of cut grass and charcoal from the weekly Doyle House gatherings. By now, the little center that started as a backyard promise had become a place where soldiers came to heal, to laugh, to cry, and most importantly, to be remembered. On a warm April afternoon, Emily stood in the entryway of the house, flipping through a stack of letters. Most were from families thanking them. Some were from veterans sharing their stories. But one stood out. No return address. No name. Just a wax-sealed envelope with her name in handwriting she hadn't seen in years. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, typed. It read, "When a man gives his life to service, the world rarely sees it. But when a young woman turns that service into a legacy, the world begins to heal. I don't need to be thanked. I just needed to know America still had people like you. Keep the faith, keep the doors open, and keep reminding them that dignity never dies. D.T." Emily didn't cry. She smiled. She folded the letter and placed it inside the Bible that once belonged to her grandfather, tucked safely behind his dog tags. She walked outside, sat beneath the oak tree, and watched as a group of children played in the grass while their parents grilled burgers nearby. A Vietnam vet with a shaky hand played guitar on the porch. A woman in scrubs passed out lemonade. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. That same day, in a quiet room in Mar-a-Lago, Trump stood at the window, looking out over the water. He held a folder in his hands. Inside were plans for 2 more quiet honor centers being built in Colorado and South Carolina. He read them carefully, then signed each with a single note. "Make it feel like home." A staff member entered and asked if he wanted to schedule a press event. "No," Trump said. "Just send the checks." The aide paused. "Sir, don't you want people to know?" Trump turned slowly and said, "They will. Not through headlines, through each other." He walked to the fireplace and looked at the mantel. The photo of Raymond still sat there, now beside one of the Doyle House lit up at night with families gathered on the lawn. In that moment, Trump didn't see politics. He didn't see polls. He saw purpose. He saw what one letter could do when answered not with speeches, but with action. And across America, in places forgotten by time and ignored by power, new homes began to rise. Not palaces, not programs, just warm buildings with open doors and flags that flew quietly in the wind. No one made documentaries about them, but inside, soldiers laughed. Widows found peace, and children learned what it meant to carry on a name with pride. Years later, when people asked Emily what started it all, she would point to that tree, that bench, that day, and she would say, "It started with a man most people thought was too busy to care, but he cared. He showed up. And everything changed after that." And maybe the world never knew the full truth. Maybe that's how it was meant to be. But the families knew. The veterans knew. And deep down, so did he. Because long after the rallies faded and the headlines changed, the greatest thing Donald Trump ever built was something that didn't need his name on it. It just needed his heart.